Hey everybody, welcome to another video review. So for tonight, I'm gonna go over something pretty special. This is Big Trouble from the Walt Disney Classics collection. As you know, I have a pretty nice Walt Disney Classics collection, and I got this piece actually pretty recently, just a few days ago. So a little bit of backstory for those of you who may not know what this is about. While I talk, I'll kind of play with the piece, move it around a little bit. So this is from a short called, I think, Mickey and the Beanstalk. And it's part of a movie called Fun and Fancy Free that was released by Disney quite a while back. And it depicts essentially the giant, whose name is Big Willie, I believe, and he's sort of chasing, Mickey and the gang, Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, as they're rescuing the harp from him. So, in terms of my connection to this, when I was a kid, I remember seeing it, and I remember really, really loving it. I don't remember any other part of Fun and Fancy Free, the movie. Maybe I just saw like this portion of it. But when I was a kid, I loved Mickey Mouse, and I also really loved like fairy tales. And I especially appreciated it when sort of Mickey and the gang weren't always just kind of doing the same hijinks over and over again. And so here, they basically recreated the story of Jack and the Beanstalk with the Disney characters playing these central roles, right? And I just had this distant memory that I really, really loved it. And it took me a long time, excuse me, it took me a long time to sort of track it down and watch it again. So this is sort of, my connection to the source material. And getting back to the Walt Disney Classics collection, this is definitely one of the crown jewels of the entire collection. I like to collect, when it comes to the Walt Disney Classics collection, or the WDCC, I tend to collect, only Beauty and the Beast. And like I've said before, I have every one of those pieces. However, I also occasionally buy pieces that I consider either extra special or extra rare, or just essentially, like a cream of the crop piece, an amazing piece, a beautiful piece. I make exceptions to get them because I just consider them, true works of art. And this piece titled Big Trouble is definitely one of them. Now, this was released. What makes this one a little bit special is that this was not like a general release. And a lot of times, some of the WDCC pieces were sort of made to order. They weren't limited. And so they made quite a number of them over the years. And they don't hold a lot of value just because they made them so many of them. But there were occasional special pieces, kind of like almost signature level pieces, although this is not a signature series. But it was so big and complicated that they only made it available to a certain number of people. And so only 1,250 of these were made. And there was another, I think, 50 artist proofs. Excuse my cough. Still getting over a little cold. But so there's only like 1,300 total of this piece made. And I believe it was sold as a convention exclusive. So again, there were these conventions called Disneyana conventions that were celebrations of, these rare limited Disney works of art, and people would, I think, have to, pay an entry fee or whatnot to go there. And then only there would they have the opportunity to buy this. You have similar things now with D23, where there's certain collectibles like dolls or other things that they sort of release only for convention goers. So because of that, this piece was not subject to sort of the same discounts as dealers normally get. And I don't believe they got much of a discount at all, if any. If they did, it was a lot smaller than their typical 20 their typical 50% off the list price. So for all of those reasons, this is a very, very difficult piece to get. It's old. And so let's kind of get into, what's going on. So obviously here you have Big Willie himself, the giant. And then you have the central characters. You can see that they're going down the beanstalk. It's from near the end of the short where they're trying to go down. And I think they make it down and then Big Willie falls down, of course. So here is the clouds, the huge beanstalk going through the clouds. There's Goofy, the harp, and then Donald and Mickey trying to move her down. And then you see, of course, Big Trouble coming with the big giant who's now awake. And then sort of an interesting bit of perspective magic. Here's like the cottage that our heroes were staying in that was lifted up by the beanstalk. When you see my hand, it shows you kind of the overall size of the piece. This is not like a gigantic piece. It's big by WDCC standards, but of course with modern statues, this is actually pretty it's okay. It's not tiny, but it's not huge. But there's a lot of weight to it. Porcelain does have a lot of weight, and so one of the things to really appreciate about him and about this particular piece is that it's incredibly intricate. It's one of the more complicated pieces I think that Walt Disney Classics Collection has ever attempted. There's always a little bit of plussing. I don't believe these guys here are actually porcelain. I think they're like pewter or something like that. But everything else is porcelain. And if you've seen my earlier WDCC videos, you'll know that porcelain, in the way that they happen to make it, is extremely complicated. There's a huge process. They paint it perfectly with a perfect assortment of colors, and they have to fire them multiple times. This piece, obviously, you can imagine, came probably in dozens of different parts that had to be hand assembled and then essentially fired again in the kiln. And it's just so intricate. Look at all the vines going through the cottage. There's vines like everywhere. There's little, bean pods over here, So it's just overall like a beautiful, complicated piece with a lot going on. It captures that moment from the short perfectly, as all of these Classics Collection pieces do. And it's also very imaginative because you don't want to waste time or money creating the entire giant, but they did a heck of a job just kind of showing you his big head, his face, right out of the cartoon. Vibrant colors. So, overall, I have to say that this is definitely one of the crown jewels of the WDCC collection, and I'm just really, really happy to get him. I mean, the story here, of course, is that he's really, really rare, so it's very difficult to find him. And then after you found him, you have to somehow get him to you in one piece. And in porcelain, that's always quite the task. And so this guy was actually mailed to me from the Midwest. And the person actually had to go to Federal Express, and he paid Federal Express to sort of custom package it, and they wound up triple boxing it. So, Big Willie in his green box was then placed in another brown box, which was then placed in another brown box, and there was a large layer of like buffering to prevent it from moving, and then it was sent express, which took about 4 days to get to me from, I believe, Michigan. So you can appreciate there's so many different places that this could break. So many different, areas that are just kind of hanging out. And in fact, the way they packaged it, they essentially locked the piece around the cloud base, and they had padding around it so that it wouldn't move at all. And then they enclosed the whole thing with like this cardboard slip cover. So there really wasn't, any padding against the piece. You can imagine any type of movement or shock, you could snap one of these little things off. So I really believe if we want to get into the subject of really, like say, complicated or fragile pieces, the WDCC has quite a few of them. Obviously, we have After the Ball, which is pretty notorious, but there's a Jungle Book scene with Mowgli in Kaa's clutches. There's the Ichabod and the Headless Horseman. So there's a lot of pretty fragile pieces, and they break. I mean, they're made out of porcelain. And by and large, I think that the Classics collection had done a pretty ingenious job of packaging them to withstand the shocks of shipping. But as everything in life changes, so does, I think, shipping. And maybe they just ship differently. Back then they handled the packages a little bit differently 20 years ago when they were making these pieces. But if you want to protect and ship a piece of this complexity, number one, it's critical that you package it in the original packaging as close as possible. Number two, do not add extra bubble wrap or extra layers. That's not going to work. They weren't there for a reason, and doing that can sometimes cause damage rather than protect. I remember buying a Mulan and Father, WDCC piece, and it's a very rare piece. I bought it, and when it came to me, it was broken because UPS, who was being paid to professionally do it, had essentially wrapped it in tons of little plastic bubble wrap in areas where it shouldn't have been, and with the shock, some of that bubble wrap in the huge clumps that they put it around basically shattered some of the pieces, some of the parts of the piece. So you want to put it in the original packaging if you can all help it. And then once you do that, it definitely helps to then put that original green box in the middle of a sea of peanuts inside a larger brown box. And I would say minimum of 2 to 3 inches all around. So it's like basically stuck in a floating sea of peanuts. And that's going to give you a pretty large box. But what that means is if the box is ever dropped, if people throw it around, you have a lot of cushioning to disperse the force before it gets into the piece itself. And for instance, for Big Trouble, the only part of the box touching the piece was the base. And as you can see, this base is very thick. It's the only part of it that's really thick, broad, all of one piece. And so if you shake this as much as you can, if there's nothing touching it, because again, there's basically a cardboard box, like a cover over it, and no part of it touches any other part of the cover box, then if this base is locked in, and no matter how much you throw it, it just moves less than a millimeter, you're gonna protect the rest of the sky. So original packaging, critical. Double boxing, critical. And then around in that double box, peanuts and foam, not newspaper, not bubble wrap, but peanuts really does the best job in dispersing as much force as possible. And then finally, when you've basically created a big box, then try to go for the fastest shipping you can reasonably afford. Obviously, overnight with any of these courier services, whether it's DHL, Federal Express, or UPS, or even USPS, overnight is going to be prohibitively expensive. It could be $400 or $500 for a box that size, almost as much as the piece itself. So that's not worth it. But at least go for express shipping. Maybe 2-day, 3-day, 4-day would be the max, I would say, because the faster the package has to get to you, the less handling it has. And I do firmly believe that if you handle it a lot less, there's less chances of people dropping it, people being careless, of it being, put through the sorting facility. It's going to be on a plane rather than on a truck. So those are things that do matter, because it's all basically the luck of the draw. Any hit, any throw, any force can break one of these things. And if you minimize the number of incidents, you minimize the chances that it breaks. And I'm sure on its way to me, there must have been, who knows, 30, 40, 50 incidences where there was a shock, there was a blow. And because of the way it was packaged, it survived all of them. But, if you go for slower shipping and it took, like, just say 10 days to reach me instead of 4 days or 2 weeks to reach me, and it's subjected to 600 incidents, then you can do the math yourself and figure out that if it only takes one bad, say, roll of the dice or one bad drop to create damage, you rather have 40, 30 incidences than 300, 400. So just some thoughts on how to kind of calculate things, how to figure it out, and try to, again, protect. So hopefully while I've been talking, you've been sort of appreciating sort of the beauty of the piece from both far frame as well as close-ups. He's sort of slanted, so if you look on the side, you can see all of the other things going up, all of these vines going up. You can see the back shot with all the different vines and the leaves. So this is definitely one of the most majestic pieces that the Classics collection has. Big, complicated, from a beautiful, wonderful short that had a lot of fond memories for me as a child. And I've wanted this piece from the minute I've seen it for probably the better part of, I think, 10 years, maybe longer. But it's so rare and so hard to find it in the right condition for a reasonable price that I just kind of waited until now. And then I finally, bumped into sort of the right person on a Facebook page and managed to just sort of, take care of business. So I'm over the moon having this in my collection, really, really happy with it. And by the way, there were a lot of conventions back then, and all of the special, like, the Walt Disney Classics collection would release sort of a special piece for each of these conventions. And this was before their signature series. So again, these were like just kind of considered the Rolls Royces of the Walt Disney Classics collection line. But some of the other pieces that was released for the convention, all of them are very special. All of them are limited. There's a Maleficent Dragon, Now You Shall Deal With Me, another nightmare to ship, filled with spines and briar patches and thorns, and it's just crazy. And then there's a Chernabog, a Night on Bald Mountain, with him reaching out with his hand, which is a classic. And then there's Monstro, the whale, with a little tiny ship, with Geppetto and Pinocchio on it in bronze. And so those are the other three that eventually I would love to own someday, but they're all pretty pricey and all very difficult to get. Some of them you can't even see. You can't even, you just have to bide your time and hope for the best. And again, all very rare and expensive and difficult to ship. So for now, just sort of, biding my time and trying to find the right combination of things. But of all of them, I love Big Willie the best, just because of the colors, his carrot top hair and the greenery, and then the wonderful Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. Again, this is kind of like my favorite, depiction of them in the fairy tale. And so I'm just super happy to have him. And again, I just don't see a lot of Walt Disney Classics collection videos. This is really rare. I don't think there's any other video of this piece actually on YouTube. And so I'm happy to kind of share it with you guys and talk about it and, kind of showcase the beautiful art. And can you imagine how many different pieces they had to create to put this together? It's all porcelain. This is not resin. There's no way to recast this. It's impossible. This is a porcelain piece, so it retains value. And so it's just kind of nice, I think, to be able to show it off from all these different angles so you can kind of appreciate the intricacy of this type of, porcelain piece and, just kind of marvel at it. And then just, again, talk about the background, talk about what it means for me. Look at the beautiful detail. You could do this today. You can do it digitally, you can sculpt it, you can print it out, it could be in resin. And that's what those artists at the Walt Disney Classics collection did. They initially carved it out of resin. But to go to the next level, and when it's time to mold it, instead of creating 1,000 resin copies, which would have been so much easier to do, for them to then cast it in porcelain, liquid porcelain, so-called slip, and then do the whiteware, the glazing, the separating it, all these parts and painting it and firing it, sometimes 5, 6, 7 times. That is insanity. That is what makes porcelain so special, and what makes this collection at its best so timeless and so unique, because it starts off like what they do today, but then they kind of take it to the next level by turning it into a porcelain glaze piece, and then to plus it with different pewter elements or bronze elements, or little jewels. It's just so good. And again, I'm just so sad that there's nothing like this today. When I was in my 20s, you could walk into a Disney store and they would have fine art prints, hand-painted cells that they would be selling for $1,500, $2,000. They would have Walt Disney Classics collection pieces. Not this. This was special always. Even back then, it was special and limited. But, they would have Walt Disney Classics collection releases, the newest ones in glass cases for you to buy at a Disney store. The Disney stores of today, I'm sorry, are pale shadows of the quality that they were 20 years ago and the sort of merchandise they offered 20 years ago. And I am sure those of you who are old enough to remember would, agree with me on that. So I do miss that, and I don't see anything that Disney has now today to sort of even come close to the quality and the beauty and the unique craft of these porcelain pieces. So it's truly sort of almost a once-in-a-lifetime, truly a special collection. And every one of them, I think, is to be treasured. And for the longest time, sometimes they wouldn't hold their value very much. But now as time has passed and Disney has grown more popular, and now people are trying to hunt down some of these older collectibles and nostalgia kicks in, their value is beginning to slowly rise, especially some of the more rare pieces. So there you have it. This is Big Trouble from Fun and Fancy Free. Hope you enjoyed this little look. And I'm gonna kind of draw back for one more turnaround so you can see it from all the different angles. This is insane right here. All the way up, all these little tendrils. So fragile. So hope you enjoyed that. And until next time, take care.